Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're taking a deep dive into ketamine and its potential for treating mental health conditions. We'll be focusing on this concept of neuroplasticity, basically your brain's ability to change and adapt.
Yeah, and we're going to be breaking down the science in a way that's easy to grasp, even if you don't have a neuroscience background. Our main source today is going to be a comprehensive scientific review called Neuroplasticity and Psychedelics.
Perfect. Now, think of your brain like a forest that's constantly changing, with new pathways being made all the time and old ones disappearing. That's kind of what neuroplasticity is.
Exactly. It's the foundation of learning and memory, but also healing from mental health challenges. And ketamine seems to be really good at boosting this.
That's what's so interesting about ketamine, right?
Yeah.
It started out as an anesthetic, but now we're looking at it for things like depression and anxiety.
Right, and because of its unique effects, it's classified as a non-classic psychedelic. But what's really interesting is its ability to enhance neuroplasticity.
Okay, so how does it actually work in the brain? How does it actually make these changes?
Well, ketamine mainly works by blocking a specific type of receptor in the brain called the NMDA receptor.
Hold on, what are receptors again? Are those like entry points on brain cells?
You got it. Basically, ketamine is shutting down that specific entry point, and that starts a whole chain reaction that actually increases the activity of another brain chemical called glutamate.
So closing one door opens another, so to speak.
Exactly. It's like resetting how your brain cells communicate, making it easier to make new connections and pathways. That's where neuroplasticity really kicks in.
Now I see the connection. And speaking of connections, the review mentions two types of neuroplasticity: structural and functional. Let's talk about the structural changes first. What does that mean when we talk about ketamine?
Okay, so think of structural plasticity as the physical structure of your brain, the actual hardware. Ketamine can actually help create new connections between brain cells and even grow new brain cells in some areas.
So it's kind of like ketamine is helping to build a better brain.
Yeah, and the research is pretty convincing. For example, studies have shown that ketamine can actually reverse the decline of these tiny things called spines, which are where brain cells connect. This is especially important when we talk about depression because it suggests that ketamine might actually be repairing some of the damage caused by the illness.
Oh, that's pretty amazing. Have there been studies in humans? Is there evidence that ketamine actually changes brain structure in people with depression?
Well, some studies suggest that ketamine might be able to normalize brain structure in people with depression, specifically in an area of the brain called the hippocampus, which is important for memory and learning.
So it's not just about making the symptoms go away. It might be actually fixing the underlying brain changes that contribute to depression.
Yeah, and that's what makes ketamine so interesting as a potential treatment. It's not just putting a Band-Aid on things, it's going deeper, trying to get to the root of the problem.
This is all really fascinating, but I know we've just barely scratched the surface here. I'm really curious to hear more about functional plasticity, those changes in how brain cells actually communicate with each other.
Right, and that's where things get even more interesting. We can dive into that after a short break.
Okay, so we talked about how ketamine can change the actual structure of the brain. But what about functional plasticity? How does ketamine affect how brain cells talk to each other?
Well, you can think of functional plasticity as the brain's software. Like how well different areas of the brain communicate with each other and how efficiently they work together.
So it's like making the communication network in the brain better.
Yeah, kind of. Imagine two friends becoming closer after like a really meaningful experience together. It's similar to how neurons make their connections stronger. And that process is called long-term potentiation, or LTP for short. And it seems like ketamine makes that process work better.
So it's like ketamine is a communication facilitator in the brain, helping to make those connections stronger and more resilient.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And this is where it gets really interesting. The research shows that ketamine might be able to reopen these critical periods of plasticity.
Critical periods. I'm not sure I follow. What are those?
Okay, well, think about when you were a kid, how easily you could soak up new information and learn new things. Yeah, those are critical periods of those times when your brain is super adaptable. But as we get older, those windows of opportunity tend to close.
And ketamine can reopen those windows even as adults.
Well, that's what the research is pointing to. So basically, the brain becomes more flexible and more open to change even as we age.
That's incredible. Does this mean that ketamine could help people break free from like deeply ingrained patterns of thinking and behavior that can contribute to mental health problems, especially if it's used along with therapy?
That's the idea. The hope is that by reopening those critical periods, ketamine can make therapy even more effective.
It's like ketamine is giving the brain a fresh start, a chance to rewire itself in a healthier way.
Exactly. And this is one of the things that makes ketamine so different from typical antidepressants, which usually just target symptoms without really addressing those underlying changes in the brain.
This is also promising, but I know we're just starting to unravel all the complexities of ketamine and how it works in the brain. The review also mentions like this intricate molecular dance that happens when ketamine enters the brain. Can you walk us through that a bit?
Sure. So one of the key players in this molecular symphony is a protein called BDNF, which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Oh, I've heard of BDNF. It's like fertilizer for the brain, right?
That's a perfect analogy. BDNF is essential for brain cells to grow and survive, and ketamine really gives it a big boost.
So ketamine increases BDNF levels, which leads to healthier brain cells that are more resilient.
That's right. And it's not just a simple increase either. Ketamine sets off this whole chain reaction involving other molecules like AMPAR-R, TRKB, and MTOR. They all work together to enhance plasticity.
It's amazing how one compound can trigger such a complex chain reaction in the brain.
It really is. And we're seeing more and more evidence from human studies showing that BDNF levels go up after ketamine treatment, particularly in those who have a good response to the therapy.
So this isn't just something happening in a lab or in animals. It could be happening in people who are getting ketamine treatment for mental health issues.
Right. And it really supports the idea that ketamine isn't just providing temporary relief. It might actually be promoting some real lasting changes in the brain. But of course, it's important to keep in mind that the research is still ongoing.
Of course, we still have so much more to learn about ketamine and what it can do, especially in the long term.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to approach ketamine therapy with caution and under the guidance of experienced medical professionals.
Right, because it's a powerful substance and needs to be administered carefully in a safe and controlled environment. This is not something to try on your own.
Exactly. Proper screening, dosing, and monitoring are crucial. And it's just as important to combine ketamine therapy with psychotherapy and other forms of support to really get the most out of it.
It's like using that window of enhanced neuroplasticity that ketamine opens up to encourage positive and lasting changes.
Exactly. We want to help people develop healthier ways of coping with stress and challenge those negative thought patterns and ultimately become more resilient.
So it's more like ketamine is a tool, not a magic bullet. It's about using it strategically to support the healing journey.
Well said. And people need to have realistic expectations. Ketamine therapy isn't a quick fix. It takes commitment and effort and a willingness to really engage in the therapeutic process.
You know, I always like to leave our listeners with something to think about based on the source material, something to ponder.
I am all ears. What do you have in mind?
Well, we've been talking about how ketamine can reopen those critical periods of plasticity and make the brain more adaptable. But what if those benefits could go beyond mental health?
That's an interesting thought. And the review does suggest that it might be possible.
Right, like if ketamine can enhance neuroplasticity so much, could it also impact other areas of brain function? Like could it help people learn a new language faster or recover from a stroke more quickly?
Those are great questions. It's certainly a possibility worth exploring.
This whole deep dive has really opened my eyes to the potential of ketamine and how it might not only treat mental health conditions, but also enhance human potential in ways we're just beginning to understand.
I agree. It's a fascinating field, and I'm excited to see where the research goes next.
As always, we encourage everyone listening to keep learning and exploring and keep those brains flexible. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a new and exciting area.
Until then, happy exploring.
See you next time.